Hi everyone, this is just a short intro to diminished chord function. Okay, diminished chords function in two overall ways, as passing chords and as auxiliary chords. Passing chords can be ascending or descending, and then auxiliary chords operate in a different way. There are other functions for them, but these are the primary ones that we're dealing with in this course. So passing chords are simply diminished chords that facilitate the connection between chords by chromatic bass note. So the bass note does not have to be a root, but sometimes it is. Here's a good example. So you can see here the chromatic connection was root position chords. Okay, and here though between the two chord and this chord here, this is an inversion. So we're creating a chromatic bass motion, but not chromatic root motion. Okay, and so either way, its role is to create chromatic bass motion. When they're ascending, they're called sharp. This is sharp 1 diminished. This is sharp 2 diminished. The most common ones are sharp 1, sharp 2, sharp 4, and sharp 5. Sharp 4 goes to the 5th scale degree in the bass, either as in this case, an inversion, 1/5, or to the 5 chord itself. Here's sharp 5 diminished going to 6. So I'll start it right here, and you can. So that's ascending diminished chords. Descending diminished chords go down by chromatic step in the bass. Here's a passage with now not only ascending diminished chords, but a descending diminished chord, a chord that creates chromatic bass motion in a downward direction. And there was sharp 5 diminished there at the end. So the two most common downward connecting passing diminished chords are flat 3 diminished and the opposite of this, flat 6 diminished going down to 5. Next we come to auxiliary diminished. Auxiliary diminished are chords with the same root as their target, which serve as just delayed resolution chords. A surprise, false resolution that then subsequently does resolve. So, for example, in this case, we're going 2 sub 5 of 1 to 1. The bass note goes to 1, but the chord is diminished. So you have this surprise effect. And then typically it will go to the target resolution chord right after that. So sometimes I call it the just kidding chord. You thought you were going to 1, just kidding, now we're at 1. Here's what it sounds like going from over here. So that's an auxiliary diminished chord. The thing to remember about them is they always have the same root as their target. The most common are 1 diminished going to the 1 chord and 5 diminished going to the 5 chord. But you can actually do this to any chord. You can provide a false resolution to any target chord. Brief note about diatonic diminished chord scales. When we have diatonic functioning diminished chords like this, we do chord scales for them that are primarily diatonic. So the way to write them is to start by spelling out the entire chord, arpeggio. Now for this, you really need to write both the lower root and the upper root. So you can see I've spelled out a C sharp diminished chord here. So C sharp is the 1, E is the minor third, G natural is the flat 5, B flat is the diminished 7th, and I've rewritten C sharp there. Then what you do is you fill in the remaining spots with diatonic notes. Now there's a trick to this, which is that diminished chords are emulations of secondary dominants in first inversion. If you analyze the notes of C sharp diminished here, and you also analyze its function earlier, we saw this chord as a passing diminished chord, you can see that it's targeting the 2 chord. It's sharp 1 diminished targeting 2. Okay, so what's the secondary dominant that targets the 2 chord? Right, 5, 7 of 2. Now let's take a minute to compare the notes of 5, 7 of 2. What is 5, 7 of 2 in the key of C? Hopefully you came up with the correct answer, which is A7. So if I put an A here in the bass, and I simply copy all these notes that are already in this chord right here, and then I do a little enharmonic adjustment. Okay, so we're analyzing now everything in relation to the root of A. So that note there is, if you have trouble reading that low, it's an E. So what is that in relation to A? Well, yes, it's the 5th. Okay, now let's look at this note. That's a G, right? What's that in relation to A? Well, again, it's a chord tone. It's a flat 7. Now let's look at this note. This is a B flat. So if that was against an A chord, that would be a flat 9. And then this note, which is a D flat, but let's think about it enharmonically for a minute. It's really C sharp. It actually should be spelt that way. C sharp is the 3rd of an A7 chord. So we really have the full A7 chord here. We have a 3rd, C sharp, a 5th, E, a flat 7, G, and then we just have this additional note, B flat, which is a flat 9. So C sharp diminished 7 is really like a rootless voicing of A7 flat 9. So it's really like A7 flat 9 over C sharp. Really what it this would be another way to express that chord. There's no A in the chord, so that's the one difference. But everything else about it, it's like a 9-for-1 voicing. It's like a 9, like we're placing the root with the flat 9. So it really is acting like 5, 7 of 2. So why is that important? Well, if you already know the chord scale for 5, 7 of 2 with a flat 9, you can use that exact same chord scale for D minor, for C sharp diminished 7. And the quick way to get the chord scale, this is very easy. Now we're coming to the part that's going to make your life a lot easier. Is it turns out the notes that are filling in these spaces between the chord tones are the notes of the target, D minor 7. There's a D, there's an F, there's an A, and there's a C. And that gives you your diatonic diminished chord scale. So again, for ascending diminished chords, all you have to do is think about what the target of that chord is, which is always going to be a half step above the root of that diminished chord. So C sharp is going to target D, D sharp is going to target E, F sharp is going to target G, and so on. And whatever that chord is in that key, those are the notes that you will use to fill in between the chord tones to create your chord scale. So this is the chord scale for sharp 1 diminished in the key of C. The notes of C sharp diminished plus the notes of the target chord, which in this case were D minor 7. So now that you know that, you should be able to do scales for ascending diminished chords, passing diminished chords. We will talk about descending diminished and auxiliary diminished on a future class and or video.